The discussion panel will focus on the importance of collaboration and technology for successful traceability. We are going to have 5 panelists. They're going to talk about their experiences. And then we will have a Q&A. So we have 5 panelists. 3 are government representatives. 1 represents the industry and 1 is the delegate of an NGO. So we're going to start with the presentations. They will have about 15 minutes for their presentation. We have about an hour for this. Please take into account the time because we are, we want to keep our times in check. So let's start. And during the presentations, you can ask in the chat. If you have a specific question, please let us know. And once the presentations are over, we will have the Q&A, okay? As we did before. So our first panelist is Mr. Juan Francisco Cordova. Juan Francisco is the general manager of the National Organization Fishing Health. He graduated from the Universidad Nacional. He has an MBA. He has worked for 20 years in risk management, processes and operations, planning and strategy, management control, finance, digital transformation in organizations of the public and private sectors. Juan is an expert in the use of innovative methods and tools for project management, like traditional, agile, and lean. He is currently the head of a project of a traceability system to transform the health service and the fishing health program. Juan Francisco, please. Okay, let me know. You can start. If you want me to move on to the next slide, let me know. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Thanks for inviting me to this workshop. To start with my presentation. So this is what we're doing in Sanipes to implement a traceability model. Because of the Peruvian regulation, in our standard, we call it traceability, but for practical terms, traceability is this, and rastreabilidad are the same. So I'm going to talk about 4 specific issues. This is what we have experienced in the implementation model of a traceability model here in Peru. These are the complications and how this ties into the regulation model that we already have. We're going to start with the new regulation tools that we are presenting as a health authority, the traceability model that we are proposing and how we are implementing it. I'm going to talk about Sanipes and how traceability as an integrating body has an impact, and some final thoughts. Great. I think a couple of more clicks. So in general, Sanipes a couple of years ago started its transformation process, thinking about the population and about our operators and administrators. We are a public entity, but we're undergoing a change process. And for that, we need regulation models that cannot be apart from the laws and policies. However, we have created a set of tools helping that will help us with the regulations. And we have an integrative or a comprehensive model for traceability, as we all know it, under the framework of a set of tools to guarantee that the hydrobiological products are safe and guarantee the health of these hydrobiological resources. This under a document that based on the digital transformation. We have innovative tools. We have a management model in our organization, and that's why that led to innovation. We are gathering more information to facilitate the analysis, and the idea is to create an organization that investigates more. We're already having some papers from universities that are not necessarily from Peru, but also outside of Peru, and facilitating technical support. So that is the strategy we're looking at in the regulatory framework. Among these are the things that we do. And as you can see, traceability has a very important and cross-sectional role. Next. So the main regulatory tools that we're looking for, we have our tax model based on risks, and part, let's say, of a model to manage risks in the entire fishing chain. And we are thinking about automated tools. We know that in the public sector, budgets are like tyrants, right? However, in this case, with the innovative tools, we are implementing new automation mechanisms. And the organizations, we want the organizations to self-regulate and to self-assess in order to promote the use of these tools. We also do the analysis of the tools, and as you can see, research, studies, and formalization. In the previous question, someone talked about informality. In our countries, this is something very important. Let's say, poses a challenge in the implementation of traceability. So what we want to look for is we want to look for incentives, and in the government we tend to let's say regulate as much as possible, and sometimes it's like a temptation to use the force of an authority to achieve certain objectives. And this, it doesn't necessarily work that way. So as part of the regulation, we want to look for different mechanisms and incentives. Even in the traceability model, what we want is to design the incentive, the corresponding incentive, so that the model is accessible, so that you have access to it, and it doesn't have to be a regulatory imposition, because that tends to not be the most practical or useful thing. Next, please. So, okay, why is traceability important? Well, this affects all countries, really. And there is a clear, very important trend in terms of traceability of hydrobiological products, even in the health of these products that we have in our countries. Internationally, the standard requirements are pretty strong or strict in terms of traceability. And private companies know this, and the authorities from other countries have asked for more emphasis in the traceability of the products that they offer in these destination markets. And the health authority cannot be, the health authority has to be supportive, so that the entire productive sector complies with the standards or regulations and trends. In addition, this is about the consumers. Consumers think more and more about sustainability of the products they consume. They want more information about where they come from. And it is true that there are very few consumers who that check, okay, where does this product come from exactly? This trend will be very strong in the next few years. And if we don't adapt first as a country and then as a private company, we will the country loses the competitiveness. And thus there is growing interest in automating traceability. A few years ago, when all this started, there were very few suppliers from other sectors, particularly the amount or the number of suppliers who sell solutions or who are starting to automate traceability, specifically in these hydrobiological products, is pretty strong. So we can't get away from these trends, or we can't escape them. So traceability is a cross-sectional path of this transformation. Why? Because it's part of the fishing and the aquaculture chain. Can you click a couple more, or a couple of more clicks, please? Okay. Although in the entire productive chain, we have private entities, but there's also a group of entities that are not necessarily private. They can be public and NGOs that participate from this chain, and making it pretty complex. If I want to determine the source, for example, and the legality of the resources, of the hydrobiological resources, I have to start bringing together all the business processes, not just from the health authority. So as Sanipes, we have two concepts here. We want this process to be integrated and interoperate. What does that mean? Integrated with what? With our own business processes, because it's the health authority's responsibility. So we have the permits for taxing, etc. And we wanted to interoperate with public and private entities. For example, in Peru, we have the production ministry that's implemented a system called Citra Pesca. And if I manage that separately, if I don't communicate with them, at the end of the day, all the information is there's a duplication of information. So I want to bring together or interoperate with this model that we're implementing. And likewise, there's a model that is used very often, and it's been very well accepted and promoted by the WWF in Peru, in which there are many artisanal fishermen who record. I mean, we don't expect to say, okay, you have to use my model. No, I have to interoperate with them because this is a model that is working. Otherwise, I would be complicating things. And this comes or goes hand in hand with the use of information for studies, the IT integration, and the training that we can provide. These are the models, or these are the objectives in the traceability model. So I can start with a single species and scale that progressively with, throughout every month. And we have a specific process, and we scale that to the entire chain. And if I don't use multiple platforms, well, I'm not going to be very useful. So I have to be able to register in all platforms possible so that they interoperate, as I said, so that they can communicate with the different existing traceability systems integrated with my own IT systems, whether for taxing purposes or to issue a health certificate, or, for permits or licenses for the different infrastructures, etc. And we want it to be transparent. We want all the information to be online, and this just shouldn't mean that there's a loss of confidentiality, because there's a lot of information in a traceability model that can be a very important know-how of every company, and that has to be, looked after. with no excessive or exceeding costs. I'm not going to tell them to register individually, register every item or every traceability event, because that's an additional cost if I'm going to integrate to the other systems. So incentives are important, because if this does not motivate the different operators, this isn't going to work. This has to turn into benefits, whether financial, commercial, among others. And it has to be multi-language. Some standards we're using, first of all, we're trying to align these to our model. It didn't start including them. These are the standard references. So these are the traceability standards that could be of interest to some of you. Okay. To summarize, in Sanipes, what we do is we have a regulation and a taxing function. We approve, or we issue health certificates. We also do health inspections. We guarantee health and safety. So we're a very important part of that in the fisheries and aquaculture chain. And we're also responsible if, let's say, something can be exported that doesn't comply with international regulations. We are in charge of guaranteeing, we have to guarantee that that is fulfilled, and there are, or we coordinate with other health authorities worldwide. So where are we headed? In our regulation model, we want to have an appropriate health and model and safety model. We want to increase. This is the regulation based on risks. We have a taxing model, a traceability model that we should have until next year. We have a digital transformation model, the comprehensive management of our processes, and have a reference lab. And to promote research and improve our services, we want to also provide technical support and promote formalization. So in general, this is our traceability model. We divided it into three, let's say, highlights, and where we gather information of the different participants of the fisheries and aquaculture chain based on standards as well. So we designed the traceability model. So we are designing, we have this milestone, and we're designing this minimum viable product specifically for mollusks in Peru. And number 3, there will be dissemination and training. Our task doesn't end here. We have an established model, and from then on, we have to do continued improvement and adapt the model to the other species and processes. Can we go to the next one, please? Well, as every project, it is obviously it entails risks, and these are significant risks that can motivate, or maybe it won't work as the way we want it to work, basically because of the interinstitutional coordination that we have in the government and anywhere. Some of these things can happen in other countries, and therefore there aren't enough incentives. So what we want is to implement enough incentives so that we can provide them properly. Some final thoughts.
And I think that I'm actually, I exceeded my established time. So some of the final reflections. So regardless The model of traceability that we follow, this is a process that should not stop, and it should be implemented in a progressive way because it will be necessary in order to guarantee the competitiveness of a country for their hydrobiological products in this case. Something really important that we have taken is the relevance of the incentives. There are different types of operators, different sizes, different needs, and each of them must have their own design of incentives, whether they're commercial, whether they're financial, whether they're processes for support or training, which can somehow can set the success of a traceability project. It's also necessary for this model to encompass all the different authorities, which is a very um, difficult challenge. Sometimes we do not coordinate amongst ourselves, and that becomes really relevant. And in order to align all of this, the usage of international standards becomes really important and necessary, as well as the usage of different technologies, blockchain, artificial intelligence, IoT devices, as well as different aspects that become a reality within this traceability model that can make a very simple model, and this becomes a little bit more complex as the model is adjusted. So that's all I wanted to present to you. I apologize, Carlos. I apologize, everybody else, if I exceeded my time. Thank you so much. No, thank you, Juan Francisco. Thank you. So now let's continue with our next presentation. Our next speaker is Mr. Alfonso Miranda Eizaguirre. He is a representative from the industry. Mr. Alfonso is an administrator, business administrator. He has over 30 years of experience in the fishery industry. He has had some top management positions in the private and public sector for 6 years. He was the vice minister of fishery in the production ministry, and he's currently the president of the committee for the sustainable management of the giant squid and of the Inter-American Commission of Intertropics. So I would like to welcome you, Mr. Alfonso, and now you have the floor. Do we have Mr. Alfonso? Hello, can you hear me? Yes, yes, we can. Thank you. Yes, I would just like to mm, correct something. I'm not representing the industry, but representing Kalamazoo. And as we can see, not only does it represent the industry of one single region, but also artisanal fishermen and importers from these countries. So hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alfonso Miranda. As they have mentioned, I'm the president of Kalamazoo, and I would like to thank SOLT for having me. They invited our organization so that we could be a part of this important event. Today, I would like to tell you about the experiences that we have had in Kalamazoo and the different efforts that we've had in order to have this different issues in order to combat the unregulated and unreported fishing, as well as to regulate the sustainable practices in the region. Next, please. So here we have the outline or the index of our presentation. First, a reference of what Kalamazoo is, then the approach of Kalamazoo with the giant squid, and then a synthesis of the conducted managements, and then a final reflection. So the Committee for the Sustainable Management of the Giant Squid, and this is the name of Kalamazoo. This is a group that is made up by leader stakeholders from the industry, as well as from the artisanal fishery and exporters. And we also have some members of the academy that are joining us. In Kalamazoo, we have representatives from Chile, Ecuador, Mexico, and Peru. They're involved in one way or another in the activity with the giant squid, and they work together in order to achieve the sustainability. So that is the most important objective that we have. As an objective defined by our organization is that the the giant squid that can be found in the Pacific can be managed according to scientific recommendations that are transparent, that are rigorous, and that have an appropriate regulatory framework that is submitted or subjected to some activity in international waters that is sustainable at the long term, and that is duly overseen in all of their aspects. Next slide, please. Kalamazoo is addressing the challenges through the generation and the strengthening. It is an organization that is not just um, focusing on being representative of a single region, but in all regions where they handle giant squid. Of course, that we are representing not just one link of the chain, but all of the other links, research, fishing, everybody is included. Nobody um, is excessively represented here. It's not an easy task, of course, and in Kalamazoo we have multiple stakeholders with history and competency, and being positioned in the market has not been easy. Nevertheless, Kalamazoo is not trying to build on those topics that may create some discrepancies, but on those points that are representing common problems for everybody involved in this sector. We have been able to get the basics in the first place, which is those who are far or who have differences to come together, because sometimes the distance and not sitting down together to talk and dream together may create more distance. So some of the common challenges that we have are the need for creating a better stock in the Southern Pacific, and the basic research for fisheries, restricting the operation of fleets that do illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing until we can completely eliminate it, and in the international waters as well as in the waters of a region. So Kalamazoo does this at two levels: at the national level with the representatives from each country, and at a regional level through the representation of the um, L'Europe, which is the one regulating the destinations in this southern area. Next slide, please. And here we have the next title, which is the management done. One of the initial achievements of Kalamazoo was to talk about the giant squid in the organization, and to really talk about it, because the organization was really focusing on topics regarding the fishing of species in New Zealand and Australia, but they were never talking about the giant squid. And then it was a matter of promoting the first way to handle the giant squid. And this was something that was actually introduced by Kalamazoo. In the seventh meeting of the Committee of l'Europe in Havana, in the Havana, which was conducted in October, Kalamazoo presented a draft of preservation measures. However, it did not progress, but it was picked up by the European Union, and it was presented by the European Union in January in 2020 in a meeting that was done in Vanuatu, and it was approved in that meeting of OROP in February in 2020. The OROP and its mechanism promoted by the different instances that allow it facilitated to really talk to other countries, but also to other governments that are really far, such as Russia and countries such as Korea, China, and so forth. Next slide, please. We have also investigated some boats that are suspicious for doing illegal fishing. We all know because of the news and everything that the cases of illegal fishing and certain fleets from some in some distant waters is not something small. There are tons of them. And Kalamazoo has submitted this request before the international conferences. So we made this request from the science point of view, mentioning that illegal fishing actually contributes for uncertainty in a science-based management, which is what we're aiming for. However, all of these requests have been ignored so far. So in the last month, there has been some journalistic evidence that has been generated, and it's really powerful. And there was actually a group of the reporters going to the area where these boats are operating, and they collected a lot of interesting evidence that should motivate to some sort of an approach by the OROP. And these are actually facts that have been proved graphically. So as of this year, we have decided to focus on urgent scientific issues. Actually, the assessment of the stock. We know that the squid is one of the main cephalopods that we have, and there was an assessment that we have, and we have done we have gotten the support from the model from the Institute of Research, Fishing Research from Ecuador, and in the meeting done in Europe late October of this year. In practice, we have actually been able to make progress in two fronts. There was a good reception of the presentation. However, there is still a paradox that some coastline countries who seem to be the main fosters or drivers do not really have that science applicated to our activity. In the following months, we will have the support of known scientists to help us out. So next slide, please. Kalamazoo exists in order to avoid illegal and unregulated fishing, which is something of a universal conscience. And there's an Asian fleet, and I'm not really discovering the black thread or anything like that. There's an Asian fleet that is operating for the giant squid that has had a really aggressive behavior, not only when fishing giant squid in these regions, but also in the southern Atlantic area, but in general, in all the oceans in the world that has been a conflict because of the operation of this fleet. However, the coastal vessels in Peru also go and operate to Europe occasionally. And they could not participate in the registry of the region because the Peruvian government had dictated a regulation through which industrial vessels were the only ones allowed to fish in international waters in this resource for giant squid, where there's no industrial vessel that is interested in doing fishing of giant squid in international waters. However, and because of the work that Kalamazoo has been doing some months ago, through some proposals that we presented to the Peruvian government, there's a regulation for these vessels to be formally and legally fishing in this area. Now we are already proposing the inscription of these vessels. For now, we have only 7 or 8 vessels, but in the following months, we will be able to make this process more massive. In July of 2020, with the aim of coordinating actions and the management in favor of sustainable fishing and in order to eliminate illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing, Kalamazoo signed with Opera, an Argentinian organization, an international agreement in order to exchange information and to create the synergy that would make it possible for both groups, for both institutions who are interested in tackling or combating this type of fishing could do so in this task, which is really, really big. Next slide, please. And to conclude, I would like to make this reflection. Kalamazoo thinks that the fishing of giant squid in international waters, in many ways, is still in a basic management status. It's basically not regulated in this region. And international law has well defined that regional organizations must be the ones in charge of doing all the handling. And we should acknowledge that we should establish a strategy that acknowledges all of these pending issues in order to do a sustainable management of these resources in international waters under the framework foreseen by the valid international law. Only in that way will we ensure having a fishing management system that is sustainable and science-based with the appropriate control levels in order to restrict illegal fishing and to acknowledge the participation of the fishing of coastal countries, which is also acknowledged by the sea international law, amongst which artisanal fleets stand out. And in the Southern Pacific, we have increased the effort that we are doing in the country and in the governments in order to be a role model in terms of how we can work in an organized way, doing this on a science base, fighting this huge problem. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Alfonso. We really thank you for your amazing presentation. And I would like to remind everyone that once we're done with all of these presentations, we will have a Q&A session and we will be able to go back to the questions that have been entered in the chat. Carlos, let me remind everyone who will be presenting, please use the microphone. The last presentation was a little bit, or was very difficult in order to be able to provide a good quality interpretation. So I would like to ask you that, please. Thank you. Yes, please. Well, the next speakers, please use the microphone and try to use it close to your mouth so that the interpretation can be easier for the interpreters. And before we forget, if if you're speaking really fast, you will hear some sort of a ping, which means that you need to slow down a little bit. It hasn't happened yet, but if you hear it, this is just some sort of a warning for you to slow down. Thank you so much. So now moving on to our next presentation. So we have our next speaker, who's Dr. Vladimir Puentes. He is a fisheries advisor. He is a marine biologist with a master's degree from Japan. He has 28 years of experience in the evaluation of sea or marine populations, international and national trade of seafood products. And he also has experience in international environmental and fisheries conventions, working with migratory species, threatened species, uh, and also the handling of shark and associated species, such as turtles, whales, and marine contamination. At the same way, he is also experienced with handling health, safety, and environment in the exploration of oil and gas. So Vladimir is already here joining us. So I'm going to give him the floor so that he can start his presentation. Please go ahead, Vladimir. Hello, Carlos. First of all, I would like to greet the entire audience. I would like to thank SALT for the invitation they have made to the National Authority of Fishery and Aquaculture that invited me to do this presentation. I would also like to greet all the participants that I've had the pleasure of meeting in previous years and that I'll be seeing here again. I would also like to, I just want to confirm if you can hear me correctly. Can you hear me correctly? Yes, everything good so far. Thank you. Great. Thank you so much. Well, this presentation was organized basically to look at all the comprehensive traceability to make sure that illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is addressed. So we're going to do this presentation because the Colombian fishery industry doesn't have the competencies in order to do the traceability of seafood products in the commercialization per se, besides the different um, marketing or trade permits that we may have. But with what our colleagues have been presenting, it's not the competency of the fishing authority. So that's why we have INDIMA, which is the counterpart or the homologous of in our region. So here we have several elements for the traceability in order to fight illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing that we have in Colombia. The map that you can see here represents all the different points where we collect information of the landings that are done in Colombia. This is the statistical fishing system in Colombia, CEPIC, and we can see that the coverage has significantly increased throughout the last years. In Colombia, we can say that has a coverage of approximately over 170 points all over the country. And for such a diverse country in terms of fishing is a very significant coverage. Being able to cover every beach and every place where there may be landings is really difficult in our countries, especially for artisanal fishing, and when we haven't really concentrated some of the landings like some of our neighboring countries have it for artisanal fishing, it becomes really, really complex. And however, I think that we have a very good coverage so far. So the first reference for this is the International Plan for Fighting the Illegal, Unreported, and Unregulated Fishing from the FAO. And Colombia is doing all the efforts in order to comply with this initiative, and is trying to put all of its effort and intention to implement the plan as good as possible. The second one, as I mentioned, is to try the fishing biological information system that we have, which is a stratified randomized sampling system that it depends on the circumstances and the place. And therefore, we have several other databases which come from the statistical system and from the observing systems in Colombia and with the Invemar in Colombia, and the same databases that sometimes the inter-American industry can give us, as well as other authorities that participate in the fishing monitoring in the country. So next slide, please. So in order to do this type of consensus, the first thing that we need to have is a list of vessels and ships that are legal in the country. And in this way, being able to see which are the ones that are illegal. This seems really easy to say, but it's really tough to do, especially when we have some artisanal vessels that not necessarily have a license upon the sea authority, and it's tough to monitor all of these things. So it's really complicated, but the interesting thing is being able to have a list of ships, as Orop does. They have a list of um of ships in order to know who is doing legal and illegal fishing. So it's a huge challenge to do so in Colombia, as I mentioned, for artisanal fishing, but it's considered to be necessary to at least have that census of the vessels available in each place, at least to have a reference of which are the ones that are fishing and which ones are not. Thank you. Next slide, please. And next we have the satellite tracking platforms. Nowadays, satellite tracking platforms, or the one that is working by excellence, is the one from the Sea Authority, which has that knowledge for this fishing issues, but also for other issues. So the tracking of the vessels coming into Colombian waters is done. And there are also some initiatives from the environmental sector in order to do the tracking of some of the ships that go into protected areas. And we are assessing one or two technological platforms that allow us to see the entrance of some ships so that they can have all of their permits in valid in order to avoid having any illegal fishing. And in those areas, they cannot fish, as simple as that. So they have also been working on this, but it's true that Ladimar and AUNAP also have an understanding, and hopefully we can have this joint work in order to find the most convenient satellite tracking platforms and have the necessary information so that we can migrate from one side to the other and vice versa, and have this tracking of the ships that may potentially be illegal in the country. So we have already had several cases of some ships that have been captured, and a ship with a foreign flag should be associated to a Colombian company, and therefore it should have a patent and a permit in order to fish in Colombian waters. And if they don't have it, then they are a ship or a vessel that, even in an area that is not protected, they are illegal if they are doing fishing there. This is an example of some of the satellite tracking platforms that work, and that work even with a free access, and that we could actually do a follow-up, because it also strengthens the fishing authority in order to coadjuvate in this task that is done by Ladimar in the framework of the mentioned functions. Next slide, please. Something else that is important for us to see in terms of the illegal fishing is the regulation of the arts and methods in the country.
In 2014, there was an agreement. We had joint work with NGOs that have worked in the country, and we gathered most of it, all of the fishing methods, to start regulating what is legal and what isn't legal. And many of these are regulated, of course, but many others need regulation work. Basically, when the meshes are, how we call it, the eye of the mesh is very small. This is how we call it in Colombia. And there are implications for fisheries. So it's important to look at it, from this art perspective, and also the methods used for fishing in the country. So therefore, it's going to be a traceability measure that we are going to have to improve. So we also have the assessment of fishing resources, and this is how we're doing with our resources. These are 3 species. This is not based just in the Inter-American organization for this. For all these species, we have wanted to assess this in our jurisdictional waters and compare them so that we know how we're doing, and to be in an environment to know how we're doing. These are common charts. These are the famous COE charts that we evaluated in the fishing resources in Colombia. We have certain levels, and then sometimes we can compare them. However, we have to interpret the results of an assessment. So we have here the Thanos abscessus. This is the tuna. This is based on the assessment. We want to see the presence of this type of tuna, or the big-eyed tuna, and with very little presence. So we have to learn how to assess and interpret the results of the models. That is why I give you this example of the big-eyed tuna. This is another example. This is a traceability that has nothing to do with the high water fishing, but how the product comes to us and how the product gets to the end or to the final consumer. This is what we have from the Inter-American Development Bank. This is, we were able to see in the port of Buenaventura how the fish went from one place to another, among other things, for traceability, to know how it gets to the end consumer and how it gets to that consumer. However, in terms of traceability, this fish that was caught on this date in this place gets to the consumer, or to this platform, or to this market. We still have a long way to go, for artisanal fisheries, that is carried out locally. We still have a challenge here. The health authorities have a lot of work to do in order to supervise the product and the quality of the product as such. We also, in Colombia, we're working with the Codex Alimentarius, which is a set of food standards, guidelines, and practical codes. You can see the equitable practices in food trade. So we have standards for fish, and the products are for those who harvest, collect, manipulate, produce, etc. of the fishing products, whether fish or seafood. and marine and continental invertebrates for human consumption. And under this framework, the Agriculture Ministry, in a subcommittee, included two fishing and continental products. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vladimir, for your presentation. Very clear, very specific. Once again, please write your questions in the chat. And at the end of the presentations, we are going to have the Q&A with the panelists. We're going to continue with our next speaker, Professor Mauro Eduardo Góngora. He's a fisheries official in the fishing department of Belize. He has 25 years of experience. He has worked as coordinator of the fishing catch unit and recently in the policy and planning department of the fisheries department. Mr. Góngora has a degree in biology from the Instituto Tecnológico de Chetumal and a master's degree in aquaculture in Starling University. Most of his work has focused on investigation of the lobster, a shark. He is member of the, he's working in the snail and shark work, and he's a member of the fauna committee of La CITES. Please, Mauro. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Just a second. I will introduce James. He's going to be the next speaker. James is a specialist in fisheries. He is from Nature Conservancy. He started working there in 2017, and he provides technical and scientific support to the fisheries program of Belize. He focuses on the implementation of the electronic traceability program of fisheries, supporting fisheries cooperatives in Belize, and under the framework of adaptive fisheries regionally. James also heads the research that evaluates the impact and ecological benefits of algae culture in Belize under the framework of the sea and culture. Mauro. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to SALT for carrying out this meeting. We agreed James and I agreed that this presentation by Belize will be divided into two. So I think we agreed that he would start first, but there's no problem. I think we can continue. He will come right after me. My presentation will be in English. Although I speak Spanish, our official language is English. So that is how I'm going to give my presentation.
My presentation is on Belize's efforts at combating IUU fishing.
Señor Mauro, ¿le puedo pedir, por favor, que cambie su canal al inglés para que no tiene que pausar?
English. Okay, perfecto. Muchas gracias. Okay, so why is it important to combat IUU fishing? And the first response to that is that at the national level, Belize's small-scale fishing industry is too very valuable for us from a socioeconomic standpoint. The industry is valued at some US 25 million, Belize million US dollars, that is, and some 3,500 fishers participate in this fishery. In addition to that, we have over 15,000 Belizeans who are direct beneficiaries of this industry. So when you put together the fishers plus their families, it accounts for approximately 4% of our population. Next slide, please. So how is IUU fishing affecting or affects the sustainable fisheries management? Central to the sustainable management of our fisheries resources, of course, is IUU fishing, to combating IUU fishing. And what we have learned over the years and from the experiences, not only here in Belize, but throughout the Central American and the Caribbean region and internationally, is that IUU fishing undermines the advances that we have achieved in strengthening fisheries management and negatively affect our economic development. This is very well documented, and of course the social well-being of our people. And in Belize, as in many other countries, most of our fishers are, of course, live for most of their lives, if not all of their lives, along the coastal areas of Belize. Next, please. So what is our commitment? As a government, the government of Belize is committed to fight IUU fishing and recognizes that this is something that we must continue to actively identify and implement tangible and effective actions at the national, at the regional, and at the international level. And we must work together collectively to curb this illegal activity. Next, please. So I wanted to just speak very briefly on some of the national advances that we have achieved over the years in Belize. Within the fisheries department of Belize, there's a specialized unit called the Conservation Compliance Unit. This is the enforcement arm of the fisheries department that carries out inspection of fishing vessels, for licenses of the fishing vessels, and for fishing licenses by fishers. So Belize is one of the countries in Central America and in the Caribbean region where I would say as much as 98% of our fishers are licensed, and licensed fisher folks. And in terms of fishing vessels, a similar percentage would be licensed. It's very small amount of fishers that, of course, operate out out at sea without the requisite fisherman license. So from 2016 to 2020, the Conservation and Compliance Unit had developed and implemented this Fisheries Enforcement Operation Manual. And so that expired at the end of last year. And currently it is being revised with the objective of updating the manual. So very soon we will have a new enforcement operation manual for fisheries. Belize is also one of the few countries in the region that is piloting the use of mobile transceiver units on our small-scale fishing fleet. And this is something that we have decided to put in place, at least on a pilot scale, because we feel that there's an opportunity to use this technology to combat the IUU fishing. And I also wanted to mention that Belize has designated its entire national waters into 8 fishing areas, and fishers are licensed to fish in these fishing areas. And so a fisherman or a fishing vessel that is not licensed to fish in a fishing area, in a particular fishing area, we would be able to track that fishing vessel, of course, using the information that we would gather from the mobile transceiver units. So this is something that we are very keen on in seeing what is the result of the pilot that we have put in place. It is expected that the efforts that we are currently undertaking can provide good examples and tools for our neighboring countries to improve their monitoring, control, and surveillance of fishing operations. Next, please. So Belize is a signatory to regional agreements to combat IUU fishing. And I wanted to let you know that we are part of two worlds. To say we are part of Central America, but we are also a part of the Caribbean region. And so at the Central American level, we are part of OSPESCA, which is the Regional Fisheries and Aquaculture Organization. And in the Caribbean, we are part of the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, CRFM. And so we are part of both worlds. And because of that particular characteristic, Belize has signed for example, the 2010 countries declaration on IUU fishing. And this particular declaration provides the CRFM states with a roadmap for a harmonized multi-pronged approach to combating IUU fishing. And we have also signed on to the OSPESCA regional strategy to prevent, deter, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated IUU fishing in the territorial waters and fishing communities of Central America. And this is since 2018. More recently, we have also signed on to the Western Central Atlantic Fishery Commission, the WCAFC. And this is the FAO organization in the Caribbean. The regional plan of action to prevent, deter, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing in WCAFC member countries. And this plan extends from 2019 to 2029.
Mauro, 2 minutos te quedan.
Sorry?
2 minutos. 2 minutos
okay.
para.
So next slide, please. So we are also part of the international. We have also signed international agreements to combat IUU fishing. The more recent one is in relation to the International Declaration Against Transnational Organized Crime in the Global Fishing Industry, which is internationally known as the Copenhagen Declaration. This is very recently, just in October of this year. Next slide, please. I wanted to speak about the traceability of spiny lobster and queen conch throughout the value chain on Belize, but that is what James is going to be speaking about specifically. So next slide, please. I just wanted to show you that we have a management plan for queen conch that is already in place. It has an adaptive management framework component into the management plan. Next slide, please. And we have our very colorful posters that we use for fishers to guide themselves in terms of how they should process and deliver conch, for example, in this case, conch to the fishermen cooperatives who would process, package, and export the fishery product. Next slide, please. And this is just the regulations that are in relation to queen conch, using this as an example. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Mauro. Continuamos con la segunda parte de James. Adelante, James.
Hola, ¿me pueden oír?
Can you hear me?
Oh. Let me just turn off.
Se escucha muy mal. That sounds really poor.
Yeah.
You can have some type of microphone added of any sort. It would make a great deal of improvement in the sound quality.
Or come closer to the, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have a microphone. I hope you can hear me.
Will you be presenting in English or Spanish?
I will be speaking Spanish if it's okay with you. Can you please come closer to the computer so that we can hear better? Okay. Thank you to Salt and Fishwise for inviting me to give this presentation. I'm going to explain the TNC strategy of electronic traceability to support the fishing or the fishery improvement project and the development process of the FDN for sustainable fisheries of conch in Belize. Well, Belize is a small country in the Caribbean coast in Central America. It has half of the Mesoamerican reef barrier. It has a small scale fishing with about 15,000 people in coastal communities that depend on fishing, with a network of $12.5 million every year. Fisheries are classified in the 5th place in Belize's GDP, and lobster is the most valuable product. The community of Sarteneja has the highest activity using kayaks, and with 8 to 12 fishermen travel long distances in the reef. In traditional boats, taking 7 to 10 days per trip, unloading a product in one of the fishing cooperatives. The fishermen are often found in the central region and south of Belize. They use fishing camps and for example, the Turnef Atoll in the black circle to put traps and boats next to their camps. As Mauro said, since 2011, the Fishing Department of Belize introduced a new territorial system based on rights known as managed access in order to improve the sustainability of fishing, giving exclusive access to defined fishing areas that you can see from 1 to 9 in the map for fishermen with restricted licenses or with licenses restricted to certain areas. Like many fisheries, the lobster fishing in Belize has decreased because of the overfishing management with insufficient funds and illegal fishing, or IUU fishing. This undermines the population of wild fauna, and this decreases the economic loss and threatens food safety, and changes in regulations have created new competition with a private sector. There's a limited market differentiation for the Caribbean lobster, and for example, more fishermen, less lobster, and a climate change, coastal development, and other impacts that threaten the lobster populations. There's been global support also. Many importing companies have strengthened their importing requirements in the past few years, demanding labeling, certification, and traceability standards that are still necessary in many countries. The companies are actively looking for solutions.
incentivos pasados en el mercado y
To support these efforts,
ineficiencias. En 2018,
in 2018, the Nature Conservancy and Future Fish and the National Cooperative tried to identify a traceability, an electronic traceability system for artisanal fisheries of lobster in order to find a system or to decrease costs through modernization of administrative processes and create a rich fishing for preservation of the populations and then be open to new markets. The electronic traceability system, Tally, developed by this fish, was selected as the most appropriate solution. The Tally system gathered data in real time in the receiving station of the National Cooperative using tablets to record the data associated to the product. For example, the date, the boat name, the fisherman's name, the type of product, total weight, a fishing zone, etc. For the first time, we were able to see who is catching what, using what equipment, and how many days at sea. Next one. TNC collaborated with Very Catch Solutions, another partner, to develop fishing tools that support the shared vision for the real-time analysis and the presentation of reports and the management. The tools, the visualization tools for the government and the NGOs to understand fisheries better. For example, the extraction maps help manage fishing by individual zone, and the charts help to separate the product by quality to take these to higher value markets. TNC is associated also with national and northern cooperatives, feature fish and government organizations to implement FIP that started in May 2019. The implementation framework of FIP is divided into 4 working areas: socioeconomic benefits, policy and legislation, science and technology, and communications. They created a committee, a steering committee, selecting a FIP coordinator with 6 working groups for FIP. Having finished having implemented the traceability tool in June 2018 and June 2021, DNC completed the installation of Tally in Northern Cooperative, the largest one in the country. This great achievement allowed TNC and the 2 cooperatives more efficiency, operating efficiency, and fisheries with the data that supports the populations, the fishing populations, and getting greater value potential of the lobster and the conch.
We know because of the Tally national system that there are 3 main factors that affect the quality of the product with the spiny lobster. From the catch until the learning, the lack of standards of ice formation, the usage of hooks instead of loops that damage the animals, especially pregnant females, as well as the usage of traps instead of others that cause stress and lactic acid in the meat, which reduces the quality. And the visual observation of the captured product shows clearly how the catching and manipulation methods affect the quality. If the meat is thick, for instance, if it's pink and firm, then it's fresh and with a high quality, and the fisherman manipulates it appropriately with an appropriate ice formation and the minimum time between the catch. But if it has some sort of a greenish kind of color, it indicates that this is a product that the fishermen had not handled appropriately in terms of the ice formation and the necessary time to land the product. Currently, the cooperatives do not have a differentiation mechanism of the product that complies with the highest quality criteria. And therefore, they're losing the opportunity of using a significant proportion of their product that complies with the highest quality standards. Okay, so we have some problems with this slide, but the traceability for the full chain focuses on the concept of quality and sustainability. We can see that end consumers, they value more quality over sustainability. The challenge, though, is how to translate that quality demand into a change in the fishing practices that promote sustainability in fishery. Cooperatives should be able to increase the price point that is paid to fishermen, which will foster the transition to better practices of fishing and manipulation of the product towards a lobster product with a higher quality and more sustainable catching method, starting with a pilot point. And it's also acknowledged that the diversification with these new products will require the strengthening of the traceability from the seed to the dish with the cooperatives with the decisions, including technology, for instance, VMS and SMART. Those technologies that we are linking to tally to record through smart labeling for consumers and through Fisheries Map, a visualization tool for fisheries administrators that verify the origin of the product, the catching method, as well as the handling practices, which will also allow to make transparent fishing management decisions in real time based on data representing over 70% of the lobster landings nationwide, strengthening the management of the lobster fishing industry as a whole. The achievements that led to our score to go from a C to a B in fisheryprogress.org with this FIP are the approval of the law for fishing resources in 2020, the implementation of the tally system and the inclusion of the commitment of doing it, and also the success with the first pilot of the tracking system of the fishing vessels from the Wildlife Conservation Society, an inventory of traps in the atoll by the local NGO, PASA, and the institutional strengthening on the consultancy on national co-op. And TNC is now collaborating with multiple participating organizations in the FIP to implement activities in the work plan of the FIP designed to allow the Belize lobster FIP to go from a score to A in fishery progress to O in the next years. And if it's successful, it will incentivize even more the change in behavior through a wider access to market niches of a high value that are looking to buy lobster from fisheries under FIP with a good performance. Thank you
Muchas gracias, James, por tu presentación.
for your
Ahora sí vamos
presentation, James. Now
paso a
we will move to our Q&A session. We're running out of time though, but we're gonna go to our Q&A session. I'm gonna read some of the questions that have been entered in the chat. So I'm gonna start with the first ones. So the first question is
para Juan.
for Juan.
¿Cuáles son las lecciones
Juan,
aprendidas,
which are the lessons learned? What opportunities and challenges have you found in the traceability processes of seafood products in Peru? Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carlos. Honestly, in terms of lessons learned, at the project level, we're currently at a 50%. However, we have already found some lessons, such as the fact that we established, even from the first presentation, we showed the fact of involving the different stakeholders is really important. This is a work done for them, and as most as possible, it should be adjusted or fine-tuned by them. Another important issue that we're currently about to implement and design has to do with the incentives. The design of incentives becomes really important. And as I mentioned previously, not only is it a matter of falling on the temptation that as a health authority, you can regulate under force, which is not as objective and it's not as efficient. However, the design of the incentives that we must have in every aspect is very important. And the relationship with the opportunities, there are multiple. This is a cross-sectional process, and every of the operators, including the authorities, can use it in a significant way within their productive process. For instance, some of them are the commercial promotion. For instance, we are immersed in including these traceability processes within some models, and we recently launched a quality stamp for aquaculture centers. And this is important because it somehow guarantees certain previous requirements that allow you to promote in a better way the products they have. Opportunities also in formalization, even the financial inclusion. One way or another, by collecting data, for instance, for artisanal fishery, you're already including them into a formality, and through associations or through several coordinations and reinforcements, you can establish that there's a possibility of payment, because by registering the number or the amount of fishing that you have, which is something that you adjust or you link to an average price, you can establish a certainty of a fixed income that can also be used in the bank system so that they can leverage this. Likewise, technical support or communication mechanisms with the operators or with the health authority, which is a huge opportunity that you can use these traceability mechanisms for. And in terms of the frequency of the discussions with the operators, that has to be continuous. In the model that we have, which is a previous or initial stage, this coordination is constant, first to collect information and then to fine tune it. So that's actually what I can tell you about it. Thank you so much, Juan. So our next question is for Mr. Alfonso. And the question is, Since there are few assessments of squid stock, where do you think is good to start to consider that the catch can be sustainable? For instance, with some vessels that catch in the offshore in the region. Did you hear my question? Yes, yes, I was able to hear you. Can you hear me too? Yes, of course we can hear you too. Okay. I would like to mention two differences. First of all, Peru in its sea dominion or domain, it's actually doing the supervision and monitoring of squid for many, many years. And there's actually some research, scientific research that is done in all the coastline. But this does not happen in international waters, and since this is a traditional resource, there's definitely a shortage. So where should we start in that environment that we are actually promoting, which is science-based? We will start with the basics by getting all the information timely and in a transparent way. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to achieve that at the core of the regional organizations of the South Pacific. There's a majority of the will of delivering that information to have the observers, for instance, in 100% of the vessels, and having a very detailed control and very stringent control and of the transshipment, and having all the information that can give us the best possible science so that we can really generate the observation and the corresponding measures. So where would we start? We would start there by asking everyone to comply with this guide, this requirement, so that they can give us the information so that we can protect this international waters. Thank you so much, Alfonso. So we have one last question because we're running out of time. And this is a question for the last presentation regarding Tally. So Tally is a system that is specifically designed for fishing in Belize, or is this something that can be adapted to any type of fishery? James or Mauro, please go ahead.
James, go ahead, please. James, go ahead, James.
Thank you, Mauro. Yes, well, the tally system has been designed to be used in fisheries all over the world. Even though it turns out that both cooperatives and Belize have actually chosen the same system, but it has also been successfully implemented in fisheries in Indonesia, Peru, and Canada. So those are also some examples. Great. Thank you so much, James. Well,
we had a very rich workshop. Thank you to all the speakers, to all the participants for taking their time and your agendas, and to be with us these 3 very good hours for everyone, and especially for the SALT team. Hopefully, we can support other processes very soon. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Gracias por la
invitación.
Gracias a todos.
Nos vemos.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Cuídense mucho. Saludos.
Muchas
Gracias a
gracias.
todos.
Saludos.